Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War news update, third part thereof, a geopolitical video. Some people keep telling me to stay away from American politics. Don't talk about I love all your other videos. You know nothing about American politics. I will keep talking about American politics. It's absolutely vital to understand the geopolitical landscape in which the Ukraine war is set. It's couched it's ensconced geographically within Europe, but between Russia and the EU, and the US is one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine in real terms for military aid and financial assistance. And with the changing winds of politics in the US, there may or may not be a good chance that the aid package that we just seen, or we're about to see, is the last for Ukraine, depending on what happens and what each political party think about supporting Ukraine going forward. Absolutely vital I talk about it. And what usually happens is people who did disagree with my politics and my valuation of someone, say, for example, like Trump, will say, you know nothing about politics. Or all that's shorthand for is, I disagree with you on politics. Not you know nothing. So anyway, just my tuppence there. So I will continue to talk about it, but I'm going to put a little analysis on one view that's been put forward today. I'll put that at the end so you can, choose not to listen to it. Right, we're going to start with Bloomberg saying the EU is considering sanctions against foreign companies behind Russian defence technology. The EU is assessing imposing sanctions against over a dozen companies that continue to supply Russia with weapons technology, such as navigation systems for missiles, Bloomberg reported yesterday. This is quite surprising. I always look at these claims and think, or these articles, and think, well, why aren't they being sanctioned already? I mean, 2 years into a war, if these guys are providing things for weapons, then surely they should have been one of the first companies sanctioned. Anyway, easier said than done, I guess, and knowing who is supplying what. It's not like there are big lists of companies and everything they do in terms of supplying weapons, and components can move through many hands before they get to the final destination. So these things are admittedly harder than might otherwise be. Talking about sanctions, well, here's a frozen asset. A pro-Kremlin oligarch's impounded yacht is being auctioned off, with the money going to Ukraine. Thanks to JR for pointing this out to me. This appeared, I think, originally in a Dutch media source. So a pro-Kremlin oligarch's impounded yacht is being auctioned off with the money going to Ukraine. A Dutch auction house is selling the seized yacht of a pro-Kremlin oligarch, as according to the Ukrainians. Ukraine said it's a first seized asset to be sold to help support the country. The move is a turning point that could pave the way for similar efforts abroad, it said. Oh, wow. So this is a Ukrainian oligarch who is pro-Russian, and that may have, it's Viktor Medvedchuk, the guy that was swapped for Sean Pinner, actually, and others in that prisoner swap that took place. He was touted to be the next president of Ukraine, but was actually captured by the Ukrainians before the Russians obviously could take Kiev and install their own puppet government. I wonder about stuff like this. So if I was a billionaire and bought a yacht like this, I'd be thinking, I'm buying this off either some person concerned with the Kremlin and with the FSB, or someone with a lot of money. Like, would I want to be sailing their bit of kit around the world? And would I be putting myself at risk to having that attacked by elements of, the Russian state, or by people associated with these oligarchs? Would they be trying to make my life hell for buying this yacht on the cheap? So I don't know how successful this will be and how much money. I think as a result of those kind of risks, the price of it will come down. And obviously someone's going to buy it at some knockdown rate, right? I mean, you offer that for me for a tenner, I might consider it. However, things like that, it's not how much they cost, it's how much they cost to maintain and keep in a very expensive marina for the entire year, full with crew who can keep it operational. Anyway, there you go. That super yacht is going to be auctioned and the money raised for Ukraine. Good stuff there. France is asking the EU to impose new sanctions to target Russian disinformation and election interference around the world, Bloomberg again has reported today, citing a draft proposal from France. I think this is a really good idea. So it's not just about sanctioning a war effort in terms of military sphere, but the information sphere, something I talk about all the time, which is we are fighting the war, and we're fighting the war in the information spaces. We need help, and we need to fight back, and this is one way of fighting back. And if France can get the EU to take that on board, I think that would be absolutely vital for the continued democratic flourishing of the EU, as it's threatened by growing autocracy and all of the elements of the information war that those autocracies are employing. Right, a North Korean economic delegation was on its way to Iran on April the 24th, according to state-run media from Pyongyang, in what would be the first official talks between the two countries in almost 5 years. We have a growing cooperation existing between, or developing between, North Korea and Iran, Iran and Russia, North Korea and Russia, and then you can throw other elements in there as well, other countries as well, and obviously China too. This is why I think the West is starting to worry. This is why the UK has ramped up defence spending and claimed that to put the defence military industrial complex on a war footing. This is huge. I don't think Rishi Sunak would have done that unless he was aware of really major threats to security, global security. We are moving into a new era of global politics right now. It is happening. This is possibly an era of war and of conflict. Certainly it is war in the information spaces and even in the cyber spaces, and we'll come to that in just a second. If this is the case, I mean, we are seeing this kind of axis of evil, if you want to call them, getting together and working with each other closely. Unless we work equally closely and fight these actors in particularly the information space, then democracy, free and fair democracy, will be on the back foot. So, to add to this challenge, Sri Lanka is hoping to join BRICS. That's a Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa organisation of states to, as they work towards being an alternative hegemonic structure. So hegemony is a supreme power, so a kind of global power unit. Now, I know many people come back at whenever I mention BRICS to say BRICS is nothing, it will amount to nothing, it's not even remotely going to challenge the dollar as an international currency. And that may be, but these movements start somewhere. And sometimes these movements become big movements. And I, for one, think this needs to be nipped in the bud or needs to be considered very carefully. BRICS can take on member states one by one, plucking off, some of these oil-rich nations in the Middle East, maybe, taking on places like Sri Lanka. You might think, well, it's not so important. Sri Lanka is a bit beholden to China with the Belt and Road Initiative that meant that Sri Lanka was having a lot of infrastructure. Their port infrastructure in Colombo, I think, was being built by the Chinese, and then the Sri Lankans defaulted on the loans, and the small print in the loans was, if you default on the loans, we take control over whatever it is we're building. Oh, that's the port infrastructure. That's now owned by China. So Sri Lanka is in the pocket of China. There are other nations around the world that have taken on these very hopeful, shiny projects. Yeah, that sounds awesome. But these have some very dangerous small prints in them, and China is strategically making itself known around the world and gathering influence, both hard and soft influence around the world, and that is a challenge. And if you let this movement grow, then you are going to be challenged by an autocratic hegemony. So when you've got Russia and when you've got China as the main components of this organization, then it clearly doesn't have people first, representation, democracy, fairness at its heart. And that's a challenge. Now, hackers have targeted a wastewater treatment plant in Indiana on Friday. A Russia-linked hacking group claimed responsibility. This should be headline news, national news in America, especially on the back of a vote. In fact, this should have been headline news ahead of the vote. This should be like, by the way, guys, just in case you're doubting who Russia are, we've just had a wastewater treatment plant cyber hacked, which is, in my opinion, a form of overt warfare. That's the same as bombing it. If you're taking that offline and stopping it from working, that's functionally the same as bombing it. So, do you know what? We need to take Russia seriously. And Americans need to. And the point is there is a bit of compromise, isn't there, within the American political system. Indeed, here we can see, when we're talking about disinformation and manipulation of the information spaces, Stephen Rosenberg, BBC reporter, doing a wonderful job in Moscow, pointing out, he goes through the papers often, and he points out the Russian press has turned on that US House Speaker, Mike Johnson, with insults such as total scatterbrain, brainwashed, and the look of a traitor, which shows the House approval of the $61 billion package for Ukraine has struck a raw nerve in Moscow. At the same time, Marjorie Taylor Greene has gone from being a laughingstock in the Russian media spaces to being someone who is being held up as Mike Johnson was previously. So when Mike Johnson was stalling the aid for 7 months, to almost single-handedly, he was being painted as this great person, and then he did a 180 switch, and now they hate him. It's nothing. It's all about whether these people are useful tools for the advancement of the Kremlin agenda. Marjorie Taylor Greene is, and he now isn't, and Trump, I would argue, is useful for them. So Trump praises House Speaker after vote on Ukraine aid. And I talked about this in my last video. I won't go too much into that, other than to say that Trump is in a difficult position now, because he realizes that half of his party are serious on doing proper geopolitics and are working for the US to remain at the top of that hegemonic ladder. And that means supporting Ukraine and supporting democracy in a fight against autocracy. Former US President Donald Trump voiced support for Speaker Mike Johnson, so he realized that. And he said he's a good guy, said the loan was the right way to go, and talks about how Mike Johnson is in a difficult position because he only has a razor slim majority. So there's a bit of pragmatism creeping now into Donald Trump's demeanor and rhetoric. Anyway, Mike Johnson, who allowed a vote on military aid for Ukraine after months of delays. Now, on talking about Mike Johnson, I talked about two things being variables in why he changed his positioning. One was intelligence, and he's referenced that himself. And he said, I really do believe the intelligence. In other words, many of my colleagues might not believe it, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. If she was to see this, she might just stick her fingers in her ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening. But Mike Johnson said, look, I really do believe it. So I said, so that's one component. The other component, I did a piece on this recently where he was visited by some Ukrainian church members, evangelicals, Baptists, I think as well, people that completely align themselves with Mike Johnson in his theological appraisal of reality, right? And when you are talking about how to convince people, yes, sometimes raw data does it, like intelligence briefings. But I'll tell you what, I won't go too deep into the psychology of influencing people and Jonathan Haidt and all those kind of psychologists, but you want to nudge people along if you're within their in-group. It's so important. So if I go to Mike Johnson as an atheist philosopher and go, you should do this with regard to Ukraine, he's going to look at me and go, well, you're in my out-group, you're a British lefty liberal, so whatever you say is poisoned. It's poisoning the well, essentially. We do it psychologically all the time. It's like, I don't like you, so I don't like what you say. So I'm less likely to take on board what you tell me. But if you get someone who's in your in-group, oh, you're a Ukrainian, okay, you're in my out-group. Oh, but you're a Baptist Christian or you're evangelical Christian. Oh, right. Oh, welcome, brother. Well, come into my house. Okay. And then you have all of this in common. And then all these people that are coming over and visiting you and with all that in common, then say, you really need to help us. Look at these churches that have been blown up. Look at these communities. Look at these Christians who've been persecuted. Then that will really hit home with Mike Johnson. That is what happened. It empirically did happen before he changed his mind, right? He was visited by a number of really high-ranking religious officials from the Christian communities in Ukraine. As well as this, so in the last week of February, a large billboard appeared across the street from Mike Johnson's home church in Benton, Louisiana, according to the Financial Times. For such a time as this, it read, quoting a Bible verse, alongside an image of a damaged Baptist church in Berdyansk, Ukraine. It addressed Johnson by name. The advertisement was paid for by Razom, a Ukrainian human rights group, and appealed to Johnson's deep Christian faith and his power as Speaker of the House of Representatives to secure billions of dollars of US funding for Ukraine's defense against Russia's full-scale invasion. The campaign paid off last week when Johnson shocked Washington and US allies around the world by allowing the House to vote for that aid, unblocking $95 billion in Ukraine funds for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. This is all part of the information war as well, but I would say this is an example of the good fight, right? Which is, this is, nothing they said was disinformation. This is true. This is a church that has been blown up by the Russians in Berdyansk. And for such a time as this, we need to take action. Just going to put that there, see what we think about it. So I think both the raw intelligence and the advice that Mike Johnson was getting from the Department of Defense and all that kind of stuff, obviously super important. But this kind of stuff it would have had huge, I think, purchase on him and maybe his church, fellow church members of the congregation, etc. Now, Colby Badwell said, I said this before, and it needs to be repeated. I'm very much a hard power guy. So military power, winning in wars and whatnot. But soft power cannot be neglected. The Russians and Chinese are wielding it incredibly effectively around the world. As I've been talking, you see this should all knit together. You can draw a straight line between it and the pro-Russian coups in Africa. I've long said that is an issue, and that's why France, I think, is also even more strongly involved than it was previously due to the many coups that are taking place in Africa, which has been traditionally their neck of the woods in terms of their post-colonial interaction with those states. Anyway, what's happened? So what didn't make it to the House's past foreign aid bills, funding for the GEC, the GEC is a global engagement center, the US agency exposing and countering foreign disinformation. I spoke with Special Envoy James Rubin on the battle and where GEC may make changes. So let's see what this is about. I just make sure that you can hear this clearly enough.
This in any way change the calculation of who the GEC chooses to work with?
We didn't provide money to anybody to make any judgment about conservative viewpoints, but I'm a realist. I live in a world where Congress has to fund us, and if Congress is prepared to work with us and get the GEC reauthorized, I don't see any reason why we would want to fund an organization that they hate so much.
There's also criticism that the GEC is suppressing speech through its communication with social media companies. Is the center communicating with social media companies? And if so, what's being said?
We talk to the social media companies about what Russia and China are doing. We talk to the social media companies about the tactics and the techniques of the Russians and the Chinese. That's all we do. We don't ask them to take things down. We don't try to decide what's true or not true. And so these charges are just phony. All I can tell you is that a Court of Appeals judgment, which had dominant Republican nominated judges, looked at this evidence and said that it's absolutely not true that the State Department sought to suppress conservative viewpoints.
So it might be getting a bit of a hard time, this agency, probably from disinformation from China and Russia and whatnot. But these are the sorts of organizations that need proper funding in order to fight against the disinformation campaigns of state actors, competitors or even enemies around the world. The EU's pressing for that to happen within the EU more formally and pass this election just to be a permanent thing. And here we have the GEC fighting that fight as well and needing the funding in order to do so. Just to let you know, I think Biden is at the moment, by the time you watch this, he's probably already said his piece, but Biden, I presume because he was on the campaign trail elsewhere, not in Washington last night, he didn't get to sign the bill, but he should have signed that now, and I think he's probably speaking now. I'm just going to go on and dip into this article. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. I meant to have this. Hugo Boss, by the way, has announced its exit from Russia. It's a German fashion company that I'm sure you all know, but they are selling off their parts inside Russia and are pulling it out there. I meant to have that earlier. Right, but Philip O'Brien, who is an author, a war author, he's an academic. He's written quite a lot about this war in general. He's now written a piece which is effectively an interview with someone who is a Republican and has been for a long time, senior Republican. He doesn't say who it is, speaks about the GOP and Ukraine. And I just thought this was really interesting insight into the thinking of someone who is maybe your classic sort of Reagan Republican. He is someone who's been in Republican politics for 45 years, developed deep personal relationships with each of the last 6 Republican presidents. So obviously he's fairly high up. I maintain personal and professional connections to many of the current Republican leaders in the party, the Congress, and a broad spectrum of policymakers. I know where my party's been, where it is today, and where it is going tomorrow. Anyway, Philip O'Brien asked him, you have chosen to stay in the party and fight for it, even though you are deeply worried about what Donald Trump has done to the party and USA. Why? So I know this is going to be kind of, this particular person will be anti-Trump. You think, oh, I'm just having to go at Trump. I'm trying to understand where the Republican Party goes, both now and actually after the election. So where it goes now, I say that Biden's probably going to win in November 2024, and that will eventually be better for Ukraine. I think Trump, and we'll talk about this because this article talks about that, but Trump needs to appeal to the centre voters, and he's really not doing a very good job of that, and especially with the whole abortion thing. So he's going to lose a lot of women voters, which is already a bit of an issue looking at the last election. And then you've got the Nikki Haley voters that we're going to talk a lot about here, what's going to happen with them. But if Trump wins, then you might see an exodus of moderate Republicans going off to, say, either a third party or towards the Democrats. If Biden wins, if Trump doesn't win and Biden wins, then you might get a situation where MAGA Republicans go either, we weren't MAGA enough and we need to become more MAGA, or MAGA doesn't work and the moderates go, look, MAGA doesn't work. We've shown you it doesn't work. It didn't work in 2020 either. We need to give up on that and go back to the GOP of old. So there will be a day of reckoning in November either way, right? And I don't think it will allow the Republicans to win. If they win in November 2024, I don't think they'll win after that, because I think you're just really holding on to a side of the Republican Party that is not universal enough to get the centre voters. So he said, look, very simply, the world needs a functioning Republican Party, or else it will fall into disrepair or worse, a new dark age led by Putin or Xi. To that end, the Republican Party needs to have a coherent foreign policy that engages the world, recognising threats and appropriately dealing with them. Frankly, probably 80% of the party rank and file could agree with this statement. It is up to those of us in the party who passionately believe in the ideals of the US to fight for this 80% and bring more of them onto our side. How can we do that if we are not in the party? I really get this analysis next. Many of your readers may scoff at what I just said, but your readers are quite intelligent. So consider this. A third of the party would never support Trump in a competitive primary. Think Nikki Haley's vote. A third of the party just wants to back the winner and fight Democrats. These are tribal Republicans. In other words, I don't like Trump, but I'm never going to vote for Biden. I'm never going to vote for Democrat. I'm so dyed-in-the-wool Republican that I will back Trump and hold my nose and back him because he's Republican. A third of the party strongly backs Trump for a variety of reasons, policy, personality, etc. So there's 2/3 of the party who could or will back a candidate in the future who is a John McCain or Nikki Haley Republican. Just as easily as Trump took over the party in 2016, his people could lose it just as easily in 2028. I'm ready to fight for that party that played an outsized role in winning the Cold War. I think that's really on point. So what you've got to remember is that a third of those, the Trumpists in that party, will vote for the Republicans no matter what. Those are not people that are going to easily go to the Democrats. So you've got them sewn in for the Republicans. This is why I said Trump needs to go to the centre if he wants to win, because he's got the MAGA lot. He brings them with him. But if he goes to the MAGA lot, then he loses the people over here. If he goes to the people over here in the centre and unifies the Republicans and tries to unify America, then those MAGA Republicans aren't going to ditch him for Biden. They will stay with Trump. They are in that cult. And so at the moment, Trump is just been doing all the wrong things. But I wonder whether there's been a realization this week as he's in court and he realizes, man, I am screwed if I keep resorting to this small area over here. I need to start showing a bit of humility, and I'm sure his advisors are going to be saying, mate, you need to cozy up to what Mike Johnson is doing at the moment. You've just seen the Senate vote 79 to 18 or whatever it was in favor of this bill. Like the Senate, and that's a lot of Republican senators are voting for this, and you'd be unwise to kind of disregard that. So this guy was asked, Phillips O'Brien says, why did Speaker Johnson do what he did? And this guy says Speaker Johnson was getting intel reports about the deteriorating situation on the Ukrainian front lines. He had to make the choice, and he didn't want to go down in history as Neville Chamberlain. He's a good man doing the best he can in a job he was thrust into under really unfavourable circumstances. So that's his interpretation. What would you say was Donald Trump's role in all of this? So the answer was his role was minimal by design. In reality, Donald Trump despises war. Unfortunately, he also admires aspects of Putin's leadership style and despises Ukraine's leadership for perceived support of Joe Biden during the Trump presidency. That's absolutely on point. Trump would much prefer to withdraw US support for Ukraine and focus on migration and trade. He also knows he needs to win the election and to stay out of jail. Given that Nikki Haley's supporters are critical to his chances of winning in November, and those supporters care about Ukraine, Trump knew he needed to kind of sort of punt on the Ukraine vote. If Trump had actually supported the Ukraine bill, then many more of his most diehard supporters in Congress would have voted yes. It's telling that they didn't, and foreshadows what Trump's policy toward Ukraine will be. Let's unpick that a little bit. That's saying that if Trump moved to the centre, then not only does he bring the voters with him, but he brings the lawmakers with him. And there would have been some of those lawmakers, maybe not Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's so openly slagged off Ukraine, but some of the others who haven't done it so openly, but that went along with that in the House. Remember, more than half of the Republican lawmakers in the House of Representatives voted against Ukraine. If Trump had said, I think we should vote for Ukraine, there would have been a lot more voting with him. A lot of those people are voting because they want to be seen to be doing what Trump wants because of their own job security. And I think that's really, really important. So then, and I don't disagree with this, even though I'd be a little bit different. Anyway, what is your best guess about what Nikki Haley Republican voters will do in November 2024? And this guy says Nikki Haley Republicans will vote for Donald Trump in November. Bill Barr, former Trump Attorney General, is a typical example. He was very vocal in support for anyone but Trump in 2024, but once the choice became binary, he backed Trump. Almost all Nikki Haley Republicans will make the same decision. Unfortunately, tribalism is a powerful force. The USA is no different from other countries in this regard. I don't think they all will, but I'm not one of these people that thinks that they will all go and either do a third-party vote or not vote or go for Biden. I recognise that an awful lot of people, because this happened with Hillary Clinton, Obama. There's a lot of people that were Hillary Clinton voters who, when she didn't win the primary and Obama won the primary, said we're never going to vote for Obama, and then they all went and voted for Obama. It's just what happens. People hold their nose, people forget. People say, well, I'd much rather Republicans in, even if it is Trump, rather than Biden or Democrats. But I'm sure there are, and I know there are because I've heard some of them speak. So there are some Haley Republicans that I think will not do that. And if that is a significant percentage of those, bearing in mind last night in Pennsylvania, there are 155,000 of them who still voted Nikki Haley. So even if 20,000 of those 155,000 vote Biden or third party, then that doesn't help Trump get back the 80,000 he needed in 2020 that went Biden's way in Pennsylvania. So Nikki Haley voters, I think, will still be, in some sense, kingmakers, maybe. Number 7, the question is, what do you believe Donald Trump would do about Ukraine and Russia if he is elected in November? Donald Trump wants to avoid an inherited war similar to Richard Nixon with dealt with in Vietnam. Trump's plan will be to pressure Ukraine by threatening to cut off military aid to trade land for peace. Trump will then call himself a peacemaker and move on to other issues. Of course, in reality, this will solve nothing and just allow Russia to claim it defeated NATO and Europe, rearm and try again to take over Ukraine from a stronger position in a few years. Moscow and St. Petersburg will soak in the glorious victory of Mother Russia while the miserable outer oblasts pay for it in blood. And then he finally says, if Trump loses, what are the chances of someone like Nikki Haley could lead Republicans in a different direction? And then he talks about this idea that I mentioned earlier, which is you will have a splitting. There will be a day of reckoning no matter what happens in November 2024 for the Republican Party. And if they just inch a victory, and I think it's unlikely, but if things can change, right? So if something happens to Biden, they could inch a victory. And if it's not absolutely resounding, there's going to be an awful lot of moderate Republicans who don't like the idea of a Trump presidency, who will be wondering what to do in the next election. And I just don't think it's a universal enough platform to maintain over time. That's my thought about it. You've just got to go to the centre ground. I don't think Trump is even remotely trying to do that. Although I think it's going to be interesting. Just watch out now. See if Trump tries to calm down his rhetoric and go for the centre ground. I think that's his only chance of getting elected. And he absolutely would have to do that. So just have a look at his rhetoric over the next few weeks and months and see whether there is a change in a shift in direction there. Anyway, that's enough from me. I need to go and prepare myself for a chat with Jake. Bro, you take care, everybody. Speak to you soon.